My journey started over 3 decades ago. It began with the understanding that Western medicine may not be the best thing or the best alternative. That's not to say that Western medicine is not good for you, but there were other alternatives. So, after my practice, clinical science, biology, bacteriology, heteroculture, I decided to take a venture overseas to a lovely country I call Japan. And my journey started there. The first few years, I did a lot of research. I was intrigued by the fact that the Japanese society was so healthy. Being part of the medical world, it was quite interesting to see 80, 90-year-olds and even 100-year-olds jogging, skipping, doing various exercises, climbing mountains. I can get into that into another story. I was fairly young. I still am young, but I was fairly young, and I would have these senior citizens passing by me on their bicycles and on the jogging trail, and it was intriguing for me as a medical professional. So I started to do some investigation, some research, and it took me to an island called Okinawa. If you haven't looked it up on the map, it is one of the 6 islands of Japan. I believe it is probably more so because there's a lot of tiny little islands that are also associated with it. And it led me to another journey, the understanding of the population of Okinawa being over 100 years old, probably at that time would have been about 50% of the population. And these people were quite friendly, so I was really able to go into their homes, into their gardens, into their children's homes, into their grandchildren's homes. You're talking about 105 years of age, some of them even having great-grandchildren. And I started to see a pattern that was really noticeable, and that was the food, what they were eating. And it was almost like every house that I went to, every dinner that I was invited to, and you must understand, senior citizens get really lonely. So when they see younger people, they just love to tell you their entire life story. And so I would go into a home and they would tell me what they've ate for the last 90 years. Believe me, that's like an all-day event. It's not 5-minute conversation. But the one common thing that I saw was that they were eating fermented foods. And not only eating fermented foods, but they were eating foods that they grew themselves. Okay. In other words, most of them had their own gardens, so they were able to go and pick their vegetables or their fruits right there and eat it within a certain amount of time. And later on, when we get into more technical stuff about Koso itself, we all know that the moment that you peel something, the moment that you take it off a tree, the moment that you pull it out of the ground, the enzymes, they start to spoil. And so what you get delivered in a store within a week or a month or whatever the delivery date is, most of the live enzymes that are in the product are gone. They no longer are there. And so they were able to digest things fairly quickly, and of course getting that nourishment that you can't get unless you have your own farm. One point. The second point that I noticed is that they not use traditional fermentation. What I mean by that is that if you want to relate that to, let's say, sauerkraut or kimchi, these are salt-oriented fermentation. What that means is you pour salt on it, you put it on the side, and you wait a day, 2 days, a week, and then you eat that. That's not the kind of fermentation that we're talking about. We're talking about fermentation using maybe their old grandmother's recipe and aged for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, allowing that synergy inside of that fermentation to break down the nutrients, and therefore they were getting much, 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 much more nutrients into their body. And it wasn't just one person, and it wasn't just ladies. It was all across the board. Even grandpa was making fermented apples, and so a lot of this was passed on to them from generations going back 100 years ago, or maybe even 200 years ago. Having said all of that, and there's much more, and I'd love to get more into all of this in another episode, that took me to the next level. How can we capture this? How can we put this into a glass bottle? How can I take this concept and bring it out to the public? And that took me into another journey, which was to try to find a factory or a process similar to that we could take commercially. And that led me to the founding of the Koso Med factory, which is what we do now. It's the beginning of the Koso journey. We're in the Koso Konnections, and I do hope that in the process of learning about Koso Konnections, that we start learning about what really is important for our long life, our longevity. I mean, we all have one thing in common, which is really natural. We want to have our children, our grandchildren, we want to have our family. And having said all of that, you also want to have a healthy family. You also want to have a set of healthy things. And the worst case scenario is, when you're eating things or you're in the process of doing things and a family member gets sick, it's quite devastating. And I think all of us in this group, and probably as we grow other groups, we all have a member of the family that has certain health issues, if not ourselves. And so the purpose of this is not necessarily to cure, but to protect.